The ideal big man to pair with Zion Williamson is Naz Reid of the Minnesota Timberwolves. I'll tell you if the Pelicans could get him in a trade, and if not, don't worry. Just draft the younger version of Reid in Dayton's DaRon Holmes II. It's a Thursday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go!
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans at NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Thursday. It's a trade target Thursday, but we're also going to look at a little bit of draft coverage. Yeah, trades and draft in the same episode of Locked On Pelicans. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here, the number one Pelicans podcast every single day, covering everything you want to know about this team. We will also look at associate head coach James Borrego interviewing with the Lakers and the Cavaliers. Not really worried about that, and I'll tell you why. But we'll start with Naz Reid. Could the Pelicans get him? Why he's a perfect fit with Zion Williamson? And if not, you can draft the next Naz Reid. This is a guy I'm starting to get very, very high on in this draft, and that's DaRon Holmes II of Dayton. So, of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. So let's get into it. Naz Reid. If you're an LSU fan, you know who this is. If you're just an NBA fan, you likely know who he is too. This is the reigning, new sixth man of the year on the Minnesota Timberwolves, who are in the conference finals, who did just manage to win a game and extend their series. But he's not just a sixth man for them. This is a guy who has closed games too. Karl-Anthony Towns was benched in game 2, and Naz Reid was the one that closed that game out. Now, Towns, to his credit, handled that very, very well, and Naz Reid got him close, but not over the hump with everything. But he is also an ideal big man to put next to Zion. This is a rim protecting stretch big who can also attack the basket off the dribble. In a sense, he is a unicorn. This year, in about 24 minutes per game, 81 games, 14 starts, so off the bench, sixth man of the year, 13.5 points, 5.2 rebounds, almost a block and a steal per game. And then he also shot 41.4% from three on 5 attempts per game. He's a career 37% shooter from three. So he gives you rim protection and stretches the court and can score and attack in other ways too. There's a reason he is the sixth man of the year. He's just really good. He's also on a pretty team-friendly deal. Next season, he's going to make $14 million. The year after that, he's a player option for $15 that he will almost certainly decline and get a massive payday. And that's probably why the Minnesota Timberwolves would look to trade him. Because he is such a unique player, so good and young, he's just 24 years old, you don't just give up on those guys. He'll be 25 next season. But because the Timberwolves are pushing the second apron, and when you get into the second apron, you're deep into the luxury tax, and it limits what you can do. If this team loses in 5 games to the Dallas Mavericks and doesn't truly look close in this series, though it's a closer 4 games so far than you might realize, does that mean they want to move him and kind of cheap out? Their ownership situation is a little unsettled as well. That's not a great position to be in, and he could be moved from that. I will say, though, it's pretty tough to try and figure out a deal that makes sense. You could easily do Brandon Ingram for Karl-Anthony Towns, knowing that the Pelicans would then need to really, really pay into the luxury tax. And that would lessen the burden on the Minnesota Timberwolves. But Brandon Ingram for Naz Reid, that doesn't really work. Salaries don't work there. That makes the Timberwolves even more expensive, and they're certainly not going to do that. But it also then just doesn't feel like the right amount. Maybe you need a little bit more coming back for New Orleans, but maybe not. Sixth man of the year is good. I also do have concerns about Naz Reid, and they're concerns. I don't know if these would come to fruition or not. I do have some concerns about Naz Reid playing more. than the 24 minutes. This was by far the most minutes he's played ever per game in his career. So one of the things you like to do with guys is look at their per 36-minute numbers. And the reason we pick per 36 minutes is that's kind of the average what a starter plays. A starter in the NBA plays about 36 minutes or so. So that's a good way to kind of equate things when guys aren't playing the same amount of minutes. It's worth noting that his per 36-minute numbers this year were down from last year. Last year, he averaged 22.5 points per game per 36 minutes. This year, just 20. Now, he took one fewer shot attempt, so that maybe explains it a little bit per game. But his field goal percentage went down. The three-point percentage went up. And per 36 minutes, he took 7.5 threes. At 41.4%, that is over 3 threes made per game. That's an excellent number. But his rebounding went down too, from 9.6 to 7.8. And actually, his blocks and steals were lower. The blocks were the lowest of his career per 36 minutes. So while he does give you rim protection, how much can he do that over the course of the game? That's essentially what it comes down to with Naz Reid. Now, he's young. There's a lot of room for improvement with him. More on that in a second here. Because when you look at him, some guys, look, there's sometimes just an ideal amount of minutes for certain players. Drew Holiday actually had this in New Orleans. They realized that if you played him more than 8 minutes at a time, the production dropped. If you go back and look at Drew's time here in New Orleans, he played 8 minutes and they would pull him because the production went down. So some guys just can't do that. Is Naz Reid one of those guys? I'm not entirely sure. But some of the numbers, some of the eye tests with that kind of says that too. That's worth keeping in mind when it comes to a trade with him. That said, this was a guy that was undrafted because he wasn't in shape. And there were concerns about his athleticism and kind of commitment, work ethic, and those sorts of things, right? And he worked on all of that, and now look at him. So if there are concerns about him playing more minutes, this is the type of guy that I think could get himself in good enough shape and work through all of that, that doesn't become a concern. And you love that kind of attitude, right? From undrafted to sixth man of the year is an incredible story because he put in the work, right? So I do think he's a guy that you would start. I think you need another center with him, but this is a guy that I think could start and really feels like it would unlock things for Zion. These players rarely exist in the NBA, and here's a young one right now on a good contract. That also means I don't know if Minnesota's going to trade him. I'd jump on it. I would give up a lot for him. I just don't think Minnesota's going to do it in any capacity. I can't really even give you at least a 2-team deal with the Pelicans and Timberwolves of a trade that makes a ton of sense. So then what? If you can't get him and you need someone like him, what do? Good news. There's a guy in the draft who looks like the next coming of Naz Reid, in my opinion. That's DaRon Holmes II. Let's dive into a scouting report on him coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans, because I do think the Pelicans are going to take a long look at drafting DaRon Holmes, and this is a name that you need to know. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Pelicans aren't in the conference finals. You want to make it a little bit more interesting? Go pick the Dallas Mavericks, the Minnesota Timberwolves. You got someone to root for now. You want to get in on the action for where Brandon Ingram will end up? Do you think it's the Orlando Magic? Because they are the favorite right now. You can do that with the player futures over at FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And again, that's $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. FanDuel, the official sportsbook of Locked On. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. We're having a lot of fun giving you the off-season content you want. Who might the team trade for? Who might they draft? We've gone deep into some of these names. We will continue to do so here. And every Thursday, we're doing big time trade target Thursday. Naz Reid. But I also see the next coming of Naz Reid in DaRon Holmes II out of Dayton. We're going to talk about him. Now, for your second listen, Ross Jackson, Locked On Saints, OTAs going on right now. Derek Carr looking good? Is that going to mean he's going to be good next season? Ross Jackson is going to break everything black and gold down over at the Locked On Saints podcast. So let's switch to draft coverage. I don't think Naz Reid's going to get traded. To me, he's like the dream. I think probably to you, he's the dream. Is he your ideal trade target in terms of a big man to pair next to Zion Williamson? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. Is there someone else? Jared Allen. Do you like him better? Is there another center we're not thinking about here that's attainable? Also worth putting that out there. But you can draft someone. And I think DaRon Holmes II looks like an NBA ready, at least in limited minutes, big man center that you could put next to Zion Williamson. This dude played exceptionally well for Dayton last year. He's a junior with really good size, 6'10", with a 7'1" wingspan. And at the combine, all of the drills he did were really good. Like really good. The agility drill was good. The shuttle drill was good. The 3/4 sprint was good. He's got a 9-foot standing reach, a 34-inch vertical, which is totally fine for a dude of his size. And he put up numbers last year. 20.4 points per game, 8.5 rebounds, 2.6 assists, 2.1 blocks, 1 steal per game. By the way, he shot 38.6% from three on not huge volume, 2.5 attempts per game, but I don't know, 38, 39% is pretty good. 54% from the field overall. When you look at this guy, he kind of does a little bit of everything. And with that athleticism, with the shot blocking, with the 3-point shooting, he reminds you a little bit of Naz Reid light. There's some differences there. Don't get me wrong, but this dude is athletic, has a good motor, has some ups, can shoot. The measurables are good. Oh, by the way, he gets to the line a ton. 8.8, almost 9 times per game last season. There's a lot to like with him. There's a lot to like with DaRon Holmes. Now, I don't think you can start him necessarily or even have him play like 30 minutes per game. You would need another more traditional center alongside him, I think. There's going to definitely be an adjustment period for Holmes II here. So you need someone else that's going to probably take the minutes early as you bring Holmes along. You also need your head coach to be willing to play him. That's going to be an important thing as well, which with Willie Green, more on Willie Green in the next segment here, and James Borrego, it remains to be seen. So this is a guy, though, that I do think would fit really well, and he should be available around the Pelicans range of 17 or 21. We'll talk more about that 17th pick in tomorrow's show because the decision that the Pelicans have to make on that is on Saturday or Sunday, I believe. On Saturday. So more on that in tomorrow's show, Friday's show. So you could get this guy. And I think that would be a very smart move for the Pelicans to do. And I think this is someone they will take a really, really long look at. 3-point shooting and rim protection, as well as a rim running big. You know, he's very good in the pick and roll as the ball handler. He does well in crowded space, which when you're playing with Zion and you're near the basket, it's going to be crowded. He does well kind of like snaking between just little windows there to find ways to get to the rim. And he's got good ups where he can be a bit of a lob threat for you. You know, there's some downsides though. There is long-term concern about the 3-point shooting. Is it real? That 3-point shooting his junior year, 86%, was really good, but the previous 2 years it was not. So is that the outlier or is it real? One of the things you look at is free throw percentage. That's a better indicator of can you shoot in the NBA than college 3-point percentage is. His free throw percentage basically stayed the same and didn't really improve or change much in his 3 years in college. And he shot it last season at 71.3%. It's not horrible for a big man, but like that's not good, right? So will that shot translate to the NBA? You know, you also look at him and he didn't play against top level competition playing for Dayton. There's going to definitely be an adjustment period because you're not playing against some of those same schools that he was playing. You got some good schools in there, don't get me wrong. And he did well against Arizona, 23 points on 8 of 17 shooting, 2 of 4 from the line, 5 of 7 from the free throw line, 11 points, right? 3 assists, 3 steals, and a block in that game. But overall, the body of work was against lesser competition. Does that change your opinion of it? Potentially, right? And then there's the turnovers on offense. Dude turns it over in just like every way possible, where you look at him, and when I was watching film of him prepping for this show, you just are like, it's not one thing to focus on when it comes to the turnovers. It's literally everything. Bad passes, right? Just fumbling the ball, not having a good handle, those kind of things. Lack of awareness on him that he's going to receive the ball. Those are a lot of the turnovers that he has. That's not a great position to be in if you're the Pelicans. But here's the thing. I'm less worried about that. You just kind of need to turn him into a finisher. And since he's good in the pick and roll, since he can be a spot up shooter potentially for you, you're less worried about that. Just catch the ball and launch a three. You don't really turn the ball over in those situations unless your hands are bad, and his hands aren't that bad. So I think that while he's very turnover prone, if you're not running your offense fully through him and using him more as a finisher, an end guy, that Pelicans can be really okay with this. The big question I have is, will he actually do well defensively? The shot blocking's there. But it was there because Dayton primarily used him in drop coverage. You're going to see a lot of people talk about him as like a switchable big on the perimeter. Maybe. He didn't play a ton of that in college. Watch his games. The athleticism says he can be. The lateral movement says he can be. The size says he can be, right? The speed says he can be. He didn't do a ton of it. It was mainly drop coverage. In college. And the Pelicans like to switch on the perimeter unless that's going to change next season, and maybe it does if you have a rim protector, which Valanciunas isn't. They want to switch and just deny you getting to the paint, getting to the rim anyway. If you have a rim protector there, maybe you can do less of that, right? But I don't know if Holmes II is going to be that guy just yet. He maybe blocks some shots. He has good instincts, good timing on that, but he's allowed to do that because he can roam a little bit, and that's not what the Pelicans defense is. So I think there's a little bit of questioning the fit, the concern there with him. But honestly, drafting him at 21, I would love it. If you draft him and trade for Wendell Carter Jr. from the Orlando Magic, who seems to be on his way out, that's a good center position to have, I think. Different players that, one's a little bit bigger, bruisier in Wendell Carter Jr., and then one's your kind of like athletic Naz Reid. Bring Holmes II off the bench and see what he's capable of doing. Pair him with Zion when you need that sort of thing, when you want to go a little bit smaller, play faster. Both of them can shoot a little bit. One rebounds better than the other. And Holmes isn't great at offensive boards. The defensive rebounding is okay, but I don't think he'll be elite at that. But I think with everything else he gives you, that can be okay. So if you can't get Naz Reid, and we're not expecting them to be able to get Naz Reid, get the younger version of him. He's 21. He's not that much younger, but he's still young. And his player comp, to me, is absolutely Naz Reid. That is the first thing I saw when watching him. And that's what kind of determined this show, right? I was watching him like, yeah, you see Naz Reid there. Let's talk about them both because I think they're really similar players. That's how shows get planned out here on Locked On Pelicans. So I would love him on this team. I think he would be great next to Zion. I think no matter what they do in the trade market, bringing in a new center, this is a guy that you should really target. I haven't kind of determined who I want the Pelicans to take at 21. I just did a mock draft where I had Filipowski go to the Pelicans with somebody, and now I'm kind of thinking back on that, and I hadn't done a ton of study on Holmes II here, but that's who I think I would take right now. But I think this is kind of if you're a long-time listener, I tend to get like fixated on one player that you're like, oh, that guy's the one I want. Then I kind of stick with him the way through. Right now, Holmes II is kind of the leader when it comes to that. We'll do a Locked On like NBA mock draft where we'll all make our picks. And trust me, like there's a very good chance Holmes II is who I'm going to draft if he's available there. But Kel'el Ware is going to be available. Filipowski should be there. Missy should be there. Holmes should be there. One of those four is going to be there. That puts the Pelicans in a good position. And right now, I love what I'm seeing from Holmes after seeing how Naz Reid succeeded this past year. Of those four guys, Kel'el Ware, Yves Missy, Kyle Filipowski, DaRon Holmes II. Who do you want the Pelicans to take? Who's your favorite? Give me the order. Rank them for me. 1 through 4. Let me know in the comments down below. So coming up next, don't worry about James Borrego leaving. I said the Pelicans should want to keep him. Yes, I did a show on this the other day. If they can. But if he leaves, I'll tell you why I'm not concerned about that. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Locked On Saints should be your second listen, but also during the day, you watching Fox Sports, ESPN, another place that's just not talking basketball, sports, football, whatever you want. Do you have to turn down the volume because there's just too much yelling, shouting, non sequiturs, things like that? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the yelling. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's switch gears. We just went over a trade target. We just went over a draft prospect. We'll have more of those in the future, and more shows based around that too. And we'll talk a little bit of the draft in tomorrow's show. One of the things I want to look at is James Borrego's name has come up in news a lot. And every time I get someone tweeting at me, and I don't like doing segments like this where I'm kind of like responding to the louder folks on Twitter, right? On X, whatever you want to call it. You know, I think that's always kind of the like vocal minority. So I don't like doing this, but one of the things I've definitely thought about this is it's okay if James Borrego leaves. And I literally just did a show last week, the week before, talking about don't let him go. Here's the thing. If he leaves to go take a promotion, a head coaching job, and he interviewed with the Los Angeles Lakers reportedly yesterday, he's going to interview in person with the Cleveland Cavaliers soon. If he's going for a promotion, that's okay. Same thing with Trajan Langdon, right? The Pelicans won 49 games last year. They have a bunch of draft picks, and they're poised to try and aggressively make their team better. This is, despite how the season ended, still not a bad position to be in and not a bad team. And there's very many head coaches who would love this job, I think, with Zion Williamson, especially with the professionalism and health that he showed you this past year. There's something here. You don't get to 49 wins by accident, even if the season ended in very, very disappointing fashion, and it did. So this isn't him jumping ship and being like, oh, this place sucks, right? Ownership is spending like $20 million upgrading the practice facility that was built relatively recently, right? They're spending some money here. We hope that they're going to pay the luxury tax this year. They kind of have to. They don't, then we'll kind of really go in on ownership a little bit. But if they pay the luxury tax, or if they're in position to and they could make a move and they don't cut costs, it's one thing to trade away Kyra Lewis Jr. It's another thing not to make a bigger move or to trade away a good player, which I don't think they're going to end up doing. They're spending a little bit here. They're trying to improve. It's a good position to be in. But if you go and take a head coaching job, like it's an upgrade, it's a promotion. It's not a sign of negative things here in New Orleans. You know, Trajan Langdon taking the Pistons job, even if the Pistons are a bit of a disaster, that's a promotion and a raise. That's good for you, even if that position's bad, right? It's not the same as you looking around, you know, your job market and be like, well, I could go to that company for a little bit more money and a slightly higher title, but that company is a disaster and maybe they'll go bankrupt. There's 30 of these jobs and that's it in the world. You jump on one if you can get it. You don't often just wait for a better one to come along because it might not. You never know how that's going to work. So when someone offers you something, you take it. Hence why you see Trajan Langdon, who's thought of very highly around the league, going to a team that had a 28-game losing streak. Is that what it was? That's why. You know, the Lakers, it's a head coaching job. You take it. Even if that job's hard. Same thing for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Even if they trade Donovan Mitchell, you take that job. You don't know when you're going to get another opportunity for that. You know, Borrego's been a head coach twice. How many more opportunities do you have? Clearly, at least one more, it sounds like. The way I would be slightly concerned, and even then not so much, is if he were to go and take, you know, an equivalent, a lateral position with another team. Would he be an associate head coach on the Lakers? It sounds like the front runner is JJ Redick. And it sounds like no one else is particularly close for that job, even if they are interviewing James Borrego. It sounds like it's going to be JJ Redick getting that job. If Borrego then joins his staff as the associate head coach, leaves New Orleans for that makes me go, wait, what? But even then, they might just pay him more. And if they're going to offer you $500,000 more, one, I think the Pelicans should try and match that. But if they don't, then you can't really fault it. And again, it doesn't mean that he's jumping ship or leaving a sinking ship or a bad position here. It's just, man, they offered him more money. What's he going to say? No, not necessarily, right? Like, I'd take more money, right? So would you in most of your jobs. So I don't view this as like this sky is falling, oh my God, what's going on thing here, right? Same with Trajan Langdon leaving. I'm happy for him. That hurts New Orleans, but I don't think it's the end of the world. Bryson Graham has done a lot of the work. He's thought of very highly, and you retained him. He wanted to stay here. He could have left and potentially joined Trajan Langdon, but he's not. And I think that really says something about how NBA people view this franchise and this organization, and that's a good thing. So I don't overall worry about this. Maybe if he goes and takes, an assistant coaching job with another team, that's one thing, but I don't know if that's going to be the case. And even if it is, I don't think that's the end of the world. I think right now the offseason is going how it kind of normally goes, and we're just waiting for the timing for bigger moves. Nothing is going to get done right now. Nothing is like the Pelicans aren't losing ground right now. They're not missing out on anything. Like nothing gets done during this period. Once the finals end, once you get a little bit closer to the draft, that's when things start to get done. But even then, might not be when you see a trade, because I believe Donovan Mitchell was traded after the draft to the Cleveland Cavaliers. So that's the type of thing that you look at. Let me see when that was, because now I'm kind of curious, right? Keep in mind kind of historic trends in the NBA. Yes, we'd like to see a deal get done today, but that's just in general not how it goes. And that doesn't mean the Pelicans aren't doing the work or doing bad things. It's just no one does things right now because they don't have to. And that's part of it. Let's see when he was traded from. Where is his transactions? Traded by the Utah Jazz to the Cleveland Cavaliers on September 3rd. Well after the draft. Well after free agency. And that's the type of thing that you got to kind of keep in mind when it comes to that. Traded on September 3rd. So not anytime soon. That's months from now. That's after Labor Day. So we'll see if something gets done in the lead up to the draft, but there's also plenty of room for things to get done significantly later too. And it doesn't mean things are kind of falling apart for the Pelicans. So I think this offseason, fine. Going as it should right now. Maybe not exciting, certainly, but I think we're going to see some bigger things down the line. And of course, we'll cover it here on the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. Might do a live show Thursday as the Friday show, and then kind of do a bonus segment and answer your questions after. So I'll consider that. If you want to see that, let me know in the comments down below, and we can get that scheduled for tomorrow. So I appreciate you all listening. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I'll see y'all tomorrow.